Trying to get the perfect film look with filters and presets is like expecting these flavor packs to turn your instant noodles into authentic ramen. While they may simulate any variety of surface level flavors, a lack of actual substance makes for an experience that just isn't authentic, and no off-the-shelf, prepackaged, or instant solution is ever going to give you the authentic film look. Because film, like food, is about so much more than just flavor. I'm David, and this is The Whole Picture. Raw meat and raw film stock don't necessarily have great flavor on their own. It takes a creative, contextual, and chemical process to transform them into something rich and substantial. But that doesn't mean we need to spend hours in the darkroom or kitchen to get authentic flavor. We can embrace modern conveniences while respecting time-tested methods to have our cake and eat it too. And this is what is at the core of emulation over just simulation. Not simply applying a surface-level flavor, but capturing the true essence of film on digital by adopting a similar process and mindset. Like a great recipe, we don't start with the seasoning, we start from scratch. So, before we choose a film stock, we need to pick a film format. Because the look of two vastly different formats, Super 8 and 70mm, has as much to do with the design of the cameras themselves as it does with the medium. After all, you could, in theory, load them with the same film stock, but the physics and physicality of each format lend entirely different visual language to the resulting images. The physicality is often the most straightforward part of emulation, where we can modify the size or ergonomics of our camera to better replicate the experience of our target format. But this isn't always necessary, and we can still capture great images by just changing our mindset and taking into account the physical attributes of a given format. For example, something like Super 8 was designed for easy handheld use through the viewfinder framing and featured a 4x3 gate. So we can mimic these physicalities with our digital cameras to achieve more authentic results. But we can't simply use our full-frame lenses cropped to 4x3 with the handheld look and consider it to be Super 8 emulation. We also need to match the physics and optical qualities of a given format. When it comes to emulating formats that are smaller than our digital sensors, using era-appropriate lenses on a crop mode can be a great choice. But Super 8 cameras mostly featured non-interchangeable, all-in-one zoom lenses, with an image circle roughly 5 to 6 times smaller than full frame, making it difficult to use the actual hardware of Super 8 for emulation purposes. But with that context, we can use appropriate settings to get a good match for Super 8's depth of field and field of view. On the other hand, the character of vintage lens renders is not as easy to emulate and can often be a matter of taste. If you find the look of your lens feels too modern for your target format, turning off lens profile corrections and using special effect filters can help capture a more appropriate look in camera. And software can also offer more flexibility and granular control over these kinds of characteristics. And to emulate larger formats, hardware like lenses that feature ultra-fast apertures, speed boosters, or anamorphic lenses can help render an image with the look and feeling of a larger format. Or you could use software to combine multiple images and replicate the perceived depth of field a larger format renders. Media Division has some excellent resources on this topic, and I highly recommend you check out their extensive library of in-depth videos if you're interested in emulating larger formats. With this context, we've now gone from a vague term like the film look to something much more objective, which will help us capture images with more authenticity. But there's also some historical, cultural, and even economic context that we need to take into account when talking about film formats. Today, we interact with so many more images of food than we would have 100 years ago. Of course, modern technology makes it easier than having to use a view camera with slow film and lenses, but it's also become more culturally relevant and economically viable to do so. What once required education, specialized equipment, and other expenses gradually became easier and cheaper, making a topic that once may have seemed frivolous into its own diverse genre with distinct looks and expectations based on the context, culture, or time period. While Super 8 wasn't the first or last amateur format, the widespread adoption of 18 frames per second made more economical use of these convenient reversal film cartridges, which made it easier for anyone to get started filming and screening movies at home. So it became viable or even culturally relevant to film and share more aspects of our lives. These qualities also lend Super 8 its signature jittery look and palette, while the technology and ergonomics made for a culture of loose framing and candid moments that came to define the home movie look. Larger formats, on the other hand, tend to increase the complexity and cost per frame, which naturally lends itself to more planning and larger productions, giving them a more controlled or professional look we associate with commercials or narrative films. While modern camera design increasingly borrows from the language of film, this will only get you so far in the emulation process, and our modern context and economic circumstances have certainly changed, so to truly emulate a legacy format, we need to put ourselves in the shoes of contemporary photographers and filmmakers. Which brings up an interesting point. While the cheaper Super 8 exhibits many traits people often associate with the film look, these qualities are not always immediately apparent on the more expensive 70mm or medium format. We need to zoom in quite a bit to find that they're actually made up of the same building blocks. And this is at the same time the biggest misconception when it comes to the film look, as well as the key to perfect emulation: grain. Often attributed as an aesthetic quality of film, it's actually more like a good soup stock. While it provides some flavor, it's actually the fundamental element of the medium. But this misconception often comes from equating grain to digital noise. Similarly, both become more apparent at higher ISO values, but digital noise is an artifact and the result of boosting a signal similar to amplifying the volume on a microphone. We get more of your voice, but it's not as clear as it could be and increases the presence of noise. Grain is more like a puzzle. Different sets have different qualities, like the color, size, and shape of a piece. But if we look at the whole picture, when using the same film stock, even Super 8 and large format are made up of the same pieces. So you could say it's the total number of pieces in that puzzle, or the size to which the film is cut, that actually determines how grainy the image looks. While this does have implications on the aesthetic qualities of an image, without the pieces themselves, we wouldn't have a picture to begin with. So you might think that overlaying some film grain scans you found online could give you the authentic film look, but unfortunately that's not quite replicating the true qualities of grain. The grain that you see in your final image is actually formed during a process where silver halides or light-sensitive crystals on our film's emulsion go through a chemical process during exposure as well as development. This organic process causes different densities of grain to form in nuanced ways throughout the image. So while the film grain overlay can be authentic and even taken from scans of real film, it's essentially a blank image. So it has no context or information about the exposure of our image that we're using for emulation. And the results can look kind of flat, not just because film grain isn't as uniform, but because film is more reactive and dynamic. Even in the areas where an image has too little or too much information, there tends to be more natural falloff compared to digital's finite thresholds. So if this image were taken on film, it would show not only subtle variations in color, contrast, and density of grain based on the exposure, but also have more natural tonal shifts. To wrap up our film emulation and capture the true look of film on digital, we need to turn our pixels into grain with specialized software. Specifically, I use a plugin called Dehancer that works with the most popular editing software out there for both stills and motion pictures. Unlike overlays, Dehancer takes into account the details of your image and with its unique algorithm, recreates it into a grain-like structure that emulates film's nuances. This lifelike quality is also super impressive, especially when it comes to moving pictures where each frame retains a unique quality. This process is also fully customizable, and we can even choose from film format templates like Super 8 to match our emulated footage perfectly, or make adjustments to suit our taste, including unique features that give the feeling of push and pull processing, or effects like gate weave, film breathe, overscan, and film damage, which used to take me hours to try to recreate, but are now just a click away. Dehancer also offers over 60 profiles of the most popular and historic film stocks out there to easily apply to your emulated image, including one of my favorites, Natura 1600, as well as over 130 camera profiles to make for an effortless and accurate workflow. Dehancer was developed by not just film lovers, but also scientists, and it really shows. Their plugin uses the correct terms and science behind film and offers so much more than just flavor for those looking to recreate the authentic film look. Viewers of The Whole Picture can get 10% off Dehancer today with my promo code, TheWholePic, which also helps fund the channel and makes videos like these possible. I've always found images and cooking to be just so fascinating because they're as much a science as they are an art form. This gives us a great reference point when approaching a new dish or project, but in both cases, we can divert from the standard to create something unique or stick to the formula and recreate an authentic classic. And this video is not to say that instant ready-made solutions are by any means wrong. There's a time and a place, even in the professional world, for conveniences. So it's really the intention that's important. What's behind the image is only going to increase in significance as our modern tools become more complex and convenient. It can be extremely powerful for the individual, but we can't forget that a great kitchen, film, or photography set is not made up of just one artist. Great work is often the sum of its parts. Understanding the science, history, and context of film is just as important as who you work with and what you specialize in. The important thing is to follow your gut. So I hope you found the video to be interesting and informative. Really, when it comes to making images, there's all kinds of ways that you can approach it, and this is just one way when it comes to emulation. But if you've ever wanted to use actual film, I have a great guide on how to get started using Super 8 to film movies and music videos, and you can find that right here.